Greetings and grace to those of you in the house. Thank you, team, for opening up. Thank you for those of you who are at home or walking or driving or wherever you're at live with us. We appreciate and enjoy your virtual presence with us. And those of you watching later on in the week, well, we're just so glad you're part of us as well. Well, this is the day the Lord has made. We're going to rejoice and be glad in it. We call this Praise Team Sunday. This time when the team leads us off, and so we're always very thankful for that. So we are in the midst of, getting connected in a disconnected world. And so today, if you look at your bulletin cover, you can see that we're talking about trust. And I had no idea when I thought about this series a couple months ago how germane it would be, because it just feels like trust is, it's like trying to grab a hold of smoke right now, just like we just can't get a hold of it. And so it's really important discussion for us to have. Well, I'd like to start off by sharing a little bit of what my life was like this past week. Well, so we, Betsy and I, made a quick trip down to see the Grands down in the Nashville area. And one of the things that was really interesting was you never know how much they're paying attention. You never know what might be meaningful for them. And so it's been a couple of years ago now that I was with the kids out walking, and I found a little acorn. But the inside of the acorn, the hard part, that brilliant brown color. And so I happened to be with Luke when I found it. And I told Luke, I said, Luke, I'm going to put this in the bathroom right on the ledge in front of me. And so every morning when I go into the bathroom and do my thing, I said, I'm going to think of you. So this past week then, we're just talking. All of a sudden he looks at me and goes, Grandpa, you still got that acorn? I thought, that's pretty cool. He knows every day I'm thinking about him. And so that was a fun moment. So the other thing I have is there's a great spot. Asher, he does not feel like he's taking a step back when we go down there. And so this past week, we went off in yet another direction. There's kind of one place that we start. There's some public property along the railroad tracks. And so I wandered back in, and I found these three structures. There's the first one, and then the second one. All right, and then the third one. And so when I see places like that, I just try to imagine what was life like for them. Who lived there, and this is pretty remote. There's no driveway, there's no tree clearance. I mean, I was killing time because I saw somebody further away with a dog and didn't want to have to worry about them seeing Asher off a leash. And so we dove into this, and all of a sudden, out of kind of literally nowhere, these three structures, popped up. And so I just didn't imagine, like, well, did they have little kids? Did they go to school? How did they use this barn? Did they have chickens? And what was life like back for them? I don't know. It's just a weird thing for me. When I see old structures like that, I try to imagine, wow, what was life for them? And then how did it come to that point of like disarray? How did they decide, we just can't keep this up anymore? We're going to have to go to another place. This just isn't working for us anymore. So I don't know. I'm weird, but I have fun imagining that and envisioning that. So anyway, that's where we're at today. We're going to talk about trust. And so now we're going to get lifted up again. The team's going to start singing for us. And this time we're going to be invited to sing along with them. So I invite you to stand if you are so inclined and sing as you feel led.
So Kurt told me, that he was going to be talking about trust and relationships today. And I started thinking about a story from the Bible that for me resounds pretty loudly regarding the subject of trust. So it's the Old Testament, and it's found in Genesis 22, verses 1 through 19. Well, as the story goes, God tested Abraham's love for him by commanding him to take his son Isaac to the land of Moriah, where he would sacrifice him. Abraham obeys, and he quickly packs up his son Isaac and begins the journey to a God-directed spot on the mountain. Now, as an aside, because I'm a teacher, I need to say this part. This Old Testament story is one that clearly foreshadows the New Testament. You see, in addition to Isaac being Abraham's only son, there are other New Testament parallels to Jesus. God sacrificed his only son out of love for humankind. Abraham was asked to sacrifice his only son out of love for God. Isaac had to carry the wood. It was placed upon his shoulders, and he had to carry it to his own demise, just as Jesus had to carry his own cross bar to Golgotha. Abraham told Isaac that God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. And we refer to Jesus as the Lamb of God. And Abraham surrendered completely to God's will, just as Jesus did. So, of course, one major difference between the Old Testament story of Abraham and Isaac and the New Testament story of Jesus is that at the last minute, God intervened and prevented Isaac's death. A happy ending for Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac, for sure. Until you look at it from a 21st century wider lens. And, maybe it's because I've spent so much of my life advocating for children, and I've had to either call DCFS myself, or I've sat in the room to support another person as they've made that call. But I find myself wondering about the irreparable damage this Old Testament halted just in time sacrifice caused the Abraham family. I need to add here that in researching this story, it became clear that many theological scholars consider this story to be more symbolic than historic. For one reason, there's lack of historical evidence, other than the Bible, to back it up. And there are different interpretations of this story within the different religions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. In some versions, Isaac is actually sacrificed. So, regardless, though, whether factual or symbolic, this story is in the Bible, and that enhances its credibility. So, what's the rest of the story for Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac? Well, today, Kurt is going to focus on the importance of trust in relationships and how relationships are damaged by something. Almost anything can damage trust, but it's usually something has taken place, whether it's a physical something or a verbal something. Something happens that damages trust. And he's going to talk about how hard it is to regain trust once it's lost because of something. Now, I'm sure Isaac had a few choice words for his father once everything calmed down. Not only did Abraham mislead Isaac about what was going to happen, but when Isaac asked his dad about the location of the sacrificial lamb, Abraham said, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. Now, that wasn't an out-and-out lie. It was more like lying through omission. But still, it was deceitful. It was deceitful enough to erode the trust between father and son. Yet that pales in comparison to how Isaac must have felt after being bound, placed on an altar, and seeing a knife in his father's hand being wielded in his direction. I can only imagine the first words out of Isaac's mouth when it was all over. "What the heck, Dad?" Followed by, I'm sure, utter silence all the way home. Yeah, I'm sure Isaac had nothing to say until he saw his mother. "Mom, you're not going to believe what Dad did." Now, Sarah, the woman who was 90 years old when she finally gave birth to a child that they had waited 25 years to conceive, could not have been pleased with her husband. Yet, given what we know about Abraham, he likely would have turned to God in prayer, possibly quoting several times this verse from Psalms. "You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples." Now, a lesson in this Old Testament story that no matter how hard we mess up, no matter how deeply we have betrayed someone's trust, our relationship with God provides us hope for healing. Yes, trust must have been broken between Abraham and his wife and his son. But their personal trust in God did not waver. Trust in God that perpetuates forgiveness, empathy, and love. It may not have happened in an instant, but we can believe that Abraham found a way to repair broken trust within his family. After all, right, if you look a little bit further in Scripture, we find out that Isaac grew up to be the second patriarch of Israel. He followed Abraham and preceded Jacob, and he furthered along the lineage of the Israelites. He had to have been healthy, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and physically, to have been able to carry that mantle forward. As Matthew writes in chapter 19, verse 25, "With man, things are impossible, but with God, all things are possible." Welcome to worship. We are so glad you're here. And reading our scripture this morning, we have Beth.
Thank you. Good morning. This reading is from the New International Version, 1 Corinthians 13, verses 6 through 8. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Then from John 14, 1 through 8, I will be reading from the translation, The Message. Don't let this rattle you. You trust God, don't you? Trust me. There is plenty of room for you in my Father's home. If it weren't so, would I have told you that I'm on my way to get a room ready for you? And if I'm on my way to get your room ready, I'll come back and get you so you can live where I live, and you already know the road I'm taking. Thomas said, Master, we have no idea where you're going. How do you expect us to know the road? And Jesus said, I am the road, also the truth, and also the life. No one gets to the Father apart from me. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him. You've even seen him. And Philip said, Master, show us the Father, then we will be content.
All right, thank you, Beth. Thank you, Gina. I have to wonder at some point, did Isaac look at his dad and say, how about a trust fall? we should we take this back a notch, Dad. We can even do it near a cliff if you want. Exactly. Beats a knife. All right, so last week we began a discussion about feeling disconnected in a world where there's a lot of disconnection taking place right now. We began that by saying, you know, it's really important for us to have empathy. That if I'm going to get connected to you, I have to really come to a place where I understand what life is like for you and hear you and take time to listen to you. And, you know, as I say, walk 1,000 miles in your shoes. So that was empathy. So today we want to talk about trust. And there are so many different levels of trust, so many different layers, so many different experiences of trust. I thought I'd just like pop it out there for you, like what, you know, just a common everyday type of experience. Where do you experience needing to trust something or someone on a daily basis? What's that? Driving, absolutely. You know, I have this weird thought every once in a while when I go over a hill, someplace where I've never driven before, I just trust that there's a road on the other side. You know, it's like, I don't know what there is, but we place our trust, right? We place our trust in the road commissioner for that place. So what else? Doctors, absolutely. We place a lot of, most of us do anyway, place a lot of trust in doctors. Very good, yeah. Yeah, what's that? At work, yeah. At work, we trust that our checks won't bounce. We trust that they will be fair to us. That our coworkers won't take a knife and put one in the old backside for us. So a lot of different ways that we at work that we trust. Yeah. Anyway, what's that? Spouses. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of trust there. And we're going to talk about that. Yeah, that's really one of the foundational elements of spousal relationship would be trust. Yeah. Anything else? What's that? Teachers. Yes, we place a lot of trust in our teachers. Those, in fact, what we see is that some don't. You know, and so they keep them at home for whatever reason. But those of us who believe in the public education is the best way of going. Yeah, we place a lot of trust in our teachers. Absolutely. Right. Yep. There are those like Betsy who help transport kids, you know, who can't get to school otherwise. They trust that, they trust that the driver is going to get their child, and then you as a driver trust that when you put those little things out there, you know, that we will stop and that we will respect that, and you trust us as a driver, you know, to do that. All right. Very good. What else? Neighbors, trust our neighbors. Yeah, right, yeah. And so that really comes into play if you find something in your yard that's not supposed to be there, you think, well, gee whiz, I know my neighbor would never do that. That must have been somebody just driving by or something. Yeah, we need to trust our neighbors, yeah. First responders, absolutely, yeah. And we learned a lot about them, didn't we, in COVID, how they really put their lives on the line for us. So put our trust in God, yep. Absolutely. Yes, Jan. Pilots. Yes. Boy, don't we ever. Yeah, howdy. I'm loving some of those pilot movies where they show the landing. You know, those are all over YouTube, and I guess once you watch a few of them, then YouTube knows you like those. But watch this difficult landing, and sometimes it'll be like 40-mile-an-hour crosswinds, and they got to like do this with the plane. And yeah, we trust that they've been properly trained. And the training that takes place in America far exceeds some of the training that other pilots get around the world. Yeah. Well, trust is so important, and trust we have a these are just levels of trust. Right now, this is pretty current. Although I'm going to comment. So the biggest area that we trust right now is small businesses, okay? We trust them. You're going to go over to the local pet store, versus maybe to the big box business. We trust the military, the police, medical. You can see down 32%. Organized religion, clergy are probably below that. The Supreme Court, 27 banks. And then, the presidency, I suspect that would have changed by now. Criminal justice. One that really caught my eye, television news. Most of us here grew up with Walter Cronkite, and we were like, book it, Dano. If he says it, we believe it. That, I think, is crucial for some of the outlook here in America right now. And this is about a year and a half old, okay? It's the most recent graph I could find. Big business and Congress in there at a whopping 8%. Gotta love that. And, whoops, wrong podium. And as I said, I think that chances are really good that the majority of those has further eroded. That's 18 months old now. So, trust. So I feel like the mystery and the power, the dynamics of human relationships, I'm talking about it because I think it's worth it. I think that the time, the energy that we say, I want to be a person who has relationships, I think it's worth that effort. But I also realize that there are a lot of forces at work that make having healthy relationships difficult. And so while we can have a healthy discussion about what those counter forces are, and we can have a discussion about how each of those play into and to what degree they play into making healthy relationships difficult, I don't think there's any room for discussion that denies the disconnection that we're currently feeling in our society and in relationships in general. And what comes out of that then, the resulting feelings of isolation, of loneliness, of depression, greater depression, and despair. And so we have this interesting contrast because we're the nation that said you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That we're that independent, we're autonomous, we're strong. We crave our freedom, our rugged individualism. But then if we push that, to its extreme, all of a sudden we're all alone. And on those occasions where we begin to look for community, then the community that has been a part of us for millennia, sometimes we're not even sure, well, I lost the road. I don't even know how to begin to find the road to take me back to that community, take that road back to love and to intimacy and deep relationships. And what if, in any way, might our struggle for deep connections with people affect our relationship with God? And so I'd like to toss out a theorem. There's a word I haven't used in a while. And that is that if we cannot experience deep relationships, deep meaningful relationships with those whom we can see, that it is difficult and perhaps nigh impossible to experience a relationship with God who we cannot see. All right, and so I'm going to proof text something. 1 John 4:20, where John says this, different, same idea, different side of the coin. If anyone says, I love God, but hates his brother, he's a liar. For whoever does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And so that's my theorem. That also means that if we can't relate this way to one another, that we're going to have difficulty relating to God. So our faith journey presupposes human relationships. At the very least, that's how we hear the message, right? I mean, all of us heard the message. I heard the message. You've heard the message from many before me, and you heard from many after me. So again, this morning, I want to take time to look at how we can better connect with human beings. Because each of the virtues that I'm covering here, last week it was empathy, today it's trust, and in the future we're going to talk about forgiveness and friendship and encouragement. Each of those, I go, well, that's the most important. Wait, no, that one's the most important. I mean, all of them feel foundational to me. Each feels like the most important one, but I know they all share in that deep importance to help us connect on a deeper level. And if this one attribute is missing in your life, or it's deficient in your life, it can be the reason why you or someone you know feels so alone and has a hard time connecting with others. And of course, we're talking about trust today, and as said, perhaps there's no other more important or significant characteristic that either opens up or closes the pathway to people to have deep, meaningful relationships. And I'm suggesting then that carries over into a deep, meaningful relationship with God. I know when we come together, I mentioned this last week, in times like this, well, we come to worship God, Pastor, and we come, we're supposed to spend our whole time talking about trusting God. And what was interesting was, I looked up, we all got Google these days, so I looked up trust in the Bible, and they're almost all exclusively about God. I was like, okay, yeah, we get that part, but what I feel like that's just the beginning, because God also came to help us connect not only this way, but also horizontally to one another as well. Excuse me. Because I do feel like if all I had to do was convince you to trust God, I think that wouldn't be so hard, right? Because a lot of us, we don't have any reason not to trust God. Our struggle's people. For many, life's empirical evidence, excuse me, life's empirical evidence, in other words, what we've lived out, is that trusting people is hard. In fact, excuse me, you may know someone who's like, I don't trust anyone. And that's from their life journey, right? And if you can't trust anyone, then I'm thinking as I read 1 John again, I'm not sure I can trust God. That there is some relationship there. See, I believe that the trusting nature or the lack thereof of our relationship directly impacts our ability to trust God. And as we examine the general erosion of trust in our society, we see a commensurate lack of trusting in God. Okay, so go back to that opening screen, and it's just wow. We are a society now that really lacks trust. If we were to, go back 40 years, I trust you would see every one of those higher, and oftentimes significantly higher. And at the same time, we would see a significantly higher degree of people who trust in God. And so while there's correlation, I'm not sure there's causation. Some of you understand that difference. If you don't, ask somebody about that. But one doesn't necessarily have to cause the other, but you can see parallel tracks, right? 40 years ago, much higher trusting in God, much higher trusting in government, much higher trusting in people, much higher trusting in the news. And now all of a sudden, 40 years later, we are a society that desperately does not trust. But I'm holding on to, if you come to a place in your life where you can trust God, it can positively transform the way that you relate to other human beings and your ability to trust them, just as the inverse of that is true as well. So I've been doing this a few years, and many of you have as well, some longer than myself. And we've seen over the years, the church has had this real interest in spiritual gifts. Okay, we did inventories and all those things, and in some churches there was a fascination with what's called speaking in tongues or interpretation of tongues or healing or knowledge or prophecy. And all that's 1 Corinthians 12. Okay, and yet the scriptures point out to us that all of those things that are so fascinating, so interesting, so look at that, that's really a shiny thing over there. All of those things are secondary to the power of love and to the connecting of human beings. So I had an interesting conversation this week, not too long ago. Now, how is it that the church had such a strong presence in society from the 60s to the 2000s? That's what sociologists are looking at. And that was really the peak, and after the year 2000, for reasons that are, I think, are valid. The 60s to the 2000s. That so many of us, so many of those who grew up in those very influential years, now having seemingly have abandoned the principles of Jesus. Oh, one of the favorite songs, that we sang with youth group was, I got the love of Jesus down in my heart. Down in my heart. Okay, any of you guys know that song? Just a few? Oh, yes, more than I would have thought. Okay, got to sing that one sometime for us, Lynn. Okay. But the reality is, it's easier to sing that song than it is to live that song, isn't it? So I think Paul might use some different words, but whatever the attraction of the church was over those 40 years of growth, over those 40 years of influence, Paul would say, hey, that's all wonderful. That's all well and good. And he might even write that certain parts of it were significant. They were standard bearers. But he says, what I want you to remember is that what's really important is faith, hope, and love. And it's in this environment of faith, hope, and love that relationships can thrive and that trust can thrive. Okay, so here's what Beth read to us in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 6 and 7. So Paul writes, now he's talking about love because that's where he wants us to focus our lives. And then he says, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. It always trusts. It always trusts. Love always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. See, when love delights in truth, it rejoices in the truth, it protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres. Paul is writing that if you take out trust, if you take away trust, you actually lose hope. If you remove trust, you lose the capacity to persevere. If you disregard trust, you lose your desire to protect. So in triathlons, I've done some over the years, it's called the 3 disciplines, okay? So you always swim, and you always bike, I'm better at that, and then you always run, not too good at that either. But really, when you get into the triathlon community, you hear the talk about a 4th discipline. And the 4th discipline is nutrition. You can nail your swimming and your biking and your running and your work up to the event. But man, if you don't do your nutrition right and you spend half of your ride hanging over your bars, getting rid of stuff because your stomach isn't right, it doesn't matter. So just as important as your training in your swimming, biking, and running, you train how to have your body be ready, for that 4th discipline. And as a foundation, Paul is saying, if you don't have trust right, you silence love. All this other stuff, you could have done everything else, he said, but if you don't have trust, you're silencing love. When love is invisible, God becomes invisible. Now, we love language, right? And grace. We love to hear about grace. But let's hear Paul out when he says, when we do not love another human being, God becomes invisible to them. And the only way they will see God, those who do not know God, is by loving them. You become the material from which God has made manifest. So we talk about grace, and whatever that word means, unconditional love regardless of our flaws, our brokenness, our inadequacies. But grace is best experienced through trust. At its core, love is trust because love requires trust. You can't say to somebody, well, I love you, but then not trust them. Because the lack of trust will eventually erode all the love that you have. So last week we asked a similar question. Did you ever wish that some people in your orbit of life were more trustworthy? Yes. Then we said, ever consider that some of the same people in your orbit of life and love ever wish that you were more trustworthy? Yeah, oh, Pastor, it's always them. Oh, I love that. You know, as a kid, we used to say, boy, you point your finger at somebody, you got 3 pointing back at yourself. Oh, not me, Pastor, it's always them. But love always trusts. But right before that, Paul writes, love always rejoices in truth. See, there's a connection between trust and truth. A person who's driven by love naturally embraces a life that can be described as trustworthy, right? If your life is going to be filled with love, you're going to be known as someone who's trustworthy. And so it begins with us, it begins with me, it begins with you. You know, if we want a world where people can be trusted, well, step one is that singular step over which we have complete control is that if you choose to become trustworthy, you must become a person of unwavering truth. You must be the kind of person that when you're the topic of conversation, imagine that people actually talk about you when you're not around. So, oh, well, you know, John, you know, book it. You know, when he says it, you can take it to the bank. Or Jane, when she says, excuse me, when she says yes, it's done. It's a done deal. Bill, nothing fake about him. No faults in him. Sarah, she's a straight shooter. You know, no guile is the old King James language there. No deceitfulness within her. Excuse me. So now, if I'm describing John and Bill and Sarah and Jane in that way, like they're straight shooters, they're, you know, you can bank on it. You're gonna say, wow, I can't wait to meet them. You know, they sound like good people. But conversely, if I say, hey, you know what, you know, you're going to meet Bill in a little while, not this Bill, of course, but if you're going to meet John, excuse me. And I got to tell you, you know, John, he comes across as a pretty good guy, but let me tell you, you know what, you can't trust him. Or Sarah, excuse me, boy, Sarah, whew, you know, again, she's going to come across as pretty good, but you can't, you know, you're not going to be very interested in meeting them, right? You know, you're going to like, I'll steer clear of them. You know, thank you very much. The word trustworthy, its etymology is pretty straightforward. It simply means that you are a person worthy of trust. So we can start there. Have you made a decision to be worthy of trust in your life? And that's such a crucial place to begin, because often we project onto others what we know to be true about ourselves. So if you're hearing this and thinking, well, I'd love to trust people, but people can't be trusted, well, maybe the question we need to ask ourselves is, am I just projecting myself onto others? So when Betsy and I got married, like a week later, we went down to live in Nicholasville, Kentucky. Neither one of us wanted to live in seminary housing. We just couldn't imagine doing that. And so we lived about 10 miles away in a town called Nicholasville. It was tenement housing, barely. You know, if you coughed, you could hear it in the next apartment over. I mean, it was that type of place. And we met so many lovely people. I had so many good friends there. There's about 10 or 15 seminary families that lived there. But we met Jay and Linda. Excuse me. And they had about, I think Sammy must have been about 7 at the time. And he was a firecracker. He never would mind his parents. He always minded us. And his parents were fascinated at how that happened. I was just like, well, we just tell him something and he either does it or he has to go home, you know, whatever. And, excuse me. But Sammy had a way, he loved to talk. And a lot of times he would just say, honest, you know, and he'd say something, say, honest. And so one time I said, Sam, I said, why do you keep saying the word honest? And he said, well, I guess it's because of how often I lie. He was being honest. See, we shouldn't have to qualify the word honest, right? if you're always honest, you don't have to keep saying it. You can just be trusted. And perhaps the guy who says, hey, you can trust me, is not someone who maybe we shouldn't be worried about. See, if you see the world as a place that cannot be trusted, I think a good place to begin is to contemplate what that says about you. Now, I'm not talking about the government, I'm not talking about Congress, I'm not talking about used car dealers or, those kind of things. But just as a general outlook, when you meet someone, is your default to say, well, I can trust them? Or might it be, no, I'm not going to trust them, even if you don't know anything about them? See, that's the beginning of developing a culture of trust. And the only way we ever become a person who can be trusted is if we become a person of the truth. And the only way we ever become a person of truth is if we want to be a person that's driven by love. Now, anyone here ever made a conscious decision to lie? I got time. I got a lot of time. I knew I wasn't the only one. And I know some of you have to go back in years to think about that, okay? But most of the time when I choose to lie, it's because I fear the consequences of the truth, right? There will be those times we fear the consequences of saying the truth. Now, for often for ourselves, but sometimes it's because that person we love, they need to understand that, we need to understand that sometimes the truth is the only way to bring healing into someone's life. But it's the truth in love, right? Motivated by love, driven by love, because love compels truth. So Betsy and I have been married almost, well, we're past the point where if we count all of our toes and fingers together, we're north of that. I'll just put it that way. And I can tell you it's awesome in marriage to be in a relationship like that, but it has to be built on trust. See, those times when you begin to wonder if you can trust the other person, it begins to erode and corrode the relationship. The more trust, the more love deepens, the more the trust. So if you're a person who's lived an uncompromising life and the story starts to make the rounds, people will go, yeah, no, that's not true, because that person lives without compromise. But it's really hard to attach something to you that's not a part of your essence. So we had a PADS program over in Woodstock, and it was fantastic. I mean, we became a PAD site like in record time. Literally, it's about 2 weeks. Some churches spend a year contemplating if they want to be a PAD site. We did it in 2 weeks. That's a whole story in itself. But because of that, then, well, PADS always has has a supervisor, has a site supervisor. And so the night supervisor was a woman, maybe early 40s. And then I'm the pastor, of course. And so ultimately, the buck stops with me. She and we had to talk a lot because we let anybody come in. If you were stumbled down, blind, drunk, we're the only site that you could come to. If you would just shut up and go throw up in the corner, we would still accept you. But you couldn't mess with anybody. You just had to behave. That's all we asked of you. Because of that, we had police there, so she and I were talking all the time. Well, the story got going around then that she and I had a little thing going, because, oh, look, they're talking together all the time. And at one point, the story got to the point where, like, some things happened in the sanctuary, up on the altar. I was like, seriously? But you know who shut it down? The guests, because they said, he'd never do that. I know him. And so when people understand who you are, if they start to hear something, the guests shut it down. It was a few of them who brought it to me and said, you're never going to believe what so-and-so said over there. And I want to tell you, I told them to shut their mouth. And they used a little more flavorful language. And that's because they knew who I was. See, I found that there'll always be people who choose to attack you, especially if you're trying to make a difference in the world. They can accuse you, but you don't have to worry about the haters. You don't have to worry about the people attacking you. Just be true, and the truth will defend you. Because, as Paul writes, love always protects. So I can't emphasize enough how important words are, and that we should always use our words to protect the people who are not in the room, because love always protects. Love always hopes. I love that love always believes the best of the person's future. We shouldn't be surprised when someone changes for the better. It shouldn't be hard to convince you that someone is changing. You shouldn't hold a person's past over them, hold a person's past against them. See, I'm not up here because God invited me to do this because I was qualified. I was eminently not qualified, but God had hope in me, and God believed that God could move me to become the person that I needed to become. And I'm glad God never gave up on me every time that I fouled up or could have fouled out of the game. But let's acknowledge trusting can be dangerous, right? I want to acknowledge that. You have to make a decision of how you're going to posture your life. You can live your life deciding no one can be trusted, or you can live your life choosing to trust people, and they both have their downside. Can we say that? Yes. If you choose to live a life of trust where you extend trust, if you choose not to live a life of trust where you extend trust, you will not live a grace-filled life. If you do not extend trust, you are not extending grace, and your life and your words will appear judgmental. But when you extend trust, you'll find yourself hurt, wounded, and sometimes even betrayed. I wish I could tell you that if you choose the path of trust, it's always going to go right, but it won't. I wish I could tell you it always go well, but it won't. But sometimes the greatest gift you can give a person who's not trustworthy is to trust them, and to give them a gift that they have perhaps not received, maybe for months, maybe for years of their life. Now, especially now in the last few years, working with the marginalized, I've been with people who made a lot of bad choices that broke my heart, choices that often betrayed my trust, sometimes betrayed me. But I've also looked at them and said, I'm still choosing to trust you. And I realized at the time that my choosing to trust them is the highest economy I can give them. It's the highest economy I can give you. I'm giving you my trust. I have a hope that you will be different. I'm not sure I use these exact words, but I've given it to you now, and I hope that you will value my trust. I hope that you will take my trust and use it for good. And what I found was that when you treat a person as if they can't be trusted, in all likelihood, they will be untrustworthy. And if we treat a person as if they cannot change, they will not change. And if we treat a person as if their worst moment will be the moment of their life, it will be. Sometimes we're called to believe in a person when they do not believe in themselves. And we have to become that source of hope that helps pull them into their future. So as we wrap it up, so what's it mean to cost? So what does it cost you when you trust and you've been hurt and you get wounded? You'll survive. You'll be okay. In fact, you might thrive. You might grow when you give trust. I really believe you get bigger. And when you withhold trust, when you live a life where you don't trust and where you kind of deprive your soul of oxygen. And if you've convinced yourself that others are not to be trusted, in all likelihood, it reflects more on you than it does on them. Conversely, when people know that you trust them, they also know that when they've messed up, when they've blown it, when they've betrayed that trust, that there's grace and that you'll help them move toward healing and wholeness. You can't change someone who doesn't want to change, but we can forgive and we can reestablish trust in a person who wants to move forward and be different. When we withhold trust, it makes our world smaller and smaller. And when we trust people, it expands our universe of influence. It expands the universe in which God works in you and God works through you. May we be trusting individuals in an untrusting world. Amen.
All right, we are at the time in our service where we lift one another up, or share our joys and concerns. We do that in person by writing on the yellow cards that are in the pew. If you're visiting with us today and you have something that you would like us to lift up, please hold that up in the air and Bill will pick that up. Pastor, what would you like to add?
Well, which one should we pick this week? So as I think about what's disturbing, and one thing is just to remind everybody, the United Methodist Church has always been a church that wanted to work for social justice and make a change in the world. So one of the things that, there's so much now. I mean, we're getting flood the zone. That's a word that we're all hearing about that. So the current administration, as I prefer to refer to it as, is, excuse me. Excuse me, I can't get rid of that. Has withdrawn the security clearance of law firms in Washington. Any law firm that had anything to do, excuse me, with any of the January 6th investigation that was a legitimate, discussion, a legitimate hearing done by Congress. So they're withdrawing their security clearance, which is a death nail in Washington, D.C. And so, in particular, one firm decided to take that to court. And then, interestingly enough, then no other law firms in Washington, D.C., you think a law firm would defend themselves, but you don't. Lawyers always take lawyers, just like we always do. Mm-hmm. And so lawyers... they've had trouble. They finally found one law firm that's willing to fight for it. But the effort by an administration to squelch the proper legal channels is frightening, and it should frighten everybody, no matter what ones, whether you consider yourself a this or a that. And the other piece that was terrifically fearful on my part was there was one of the January 6 law firms, again, had this, came down, had all their security clearances taken away, and they capitulated by saying to the current administration, we'll give you $40 million in free legal services. Friends, I don't care which side of the aisle you're walking on, this is worrisome. And so, because we are to be a nation of law, and when law firms find themselves having to bend the knee and capitulate to anyone else, they shouldn't, And so that's where I'm at. Like I said, so much we could talk about, but that's what's got my my fearometer spinning fast.
Well, Blue is lifting up his nephew who had a bad car accident last night. Beth is asking for support and comfort for families and loved ones diagnosed with incurable terminal illness. Pray their faith and love gives strength to all concerned. Catherine is lifting up her son Dave for health issues. We also want to lift up Nancy and Dan and Kaisa Meeks, and prayers for the Ragusan family. So with that, our praise team will sing our prayer song, Give Thanks, number 2036. We live in a time when things, problems, concerns, fears seem insurmountable. And oftentimes we find ourselves saying, what can I do? And as we heard today, and we were reminded today, and we need to hear this reminder every day, the answer is love. And what does that look like? Sometimes love looks like a smile. Sometimes love looks like an honest response. Sometimes love looks like lending a hand financially. It looks like so many things, but we are able to affect even a ripple of the world. But that ripple goes out and goes out and goes out like a stone being cast in the water. So Lord, help us to give thanks to you by being you, by being love. And Lord, help us to remember all that we do as we go through the week. Every smile, every gesture, every kind word is a reflection of our trust in you, because we extend our trust to others. And now, Lord, hear us as we pray the prayer that Jesus taught by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
All right, well, today our stewardship moment's going to be giving some of you an introduction to the ministry of Feed My Starving Children. So we got a little video for you to bring you into the knowledge.
Imagine a world without hunger. This is the world we dream of. A world where bright futures are the norm, where children, families, and communities thrive. But every year, millions of children are still dying from preventable causes, such as pneumonia, diarrhea, malaria, and undernutrition. Hunger causes nearly half of deaths in children under 5 years old. In spite of all this, we know that hope is not lost. It starts with food, and it starts with all of us. We believe in feeding kids. As a Christian nonprofit, we're dedicated to seeing every child whole in body and spirit. Nutrition allows children to grow, thrive, and develop to their full potential. We believe in feeding spirits of children around the world and volunteers and donors. We love like Jesus, with abandon because he first loved us. We believe our lives are made better when we give our time and resources to help others. We believe in empowering communities, that all people deserve the dignity of self-reliance. We work with food distribution partners that stay with communities for the long haul, empowering them to move from relief to development. Imagine a world without hunger. It's not just a dream, it's a possibility. And it's because of you.
So 1 week from Saturday, 13 days from now, we've got a group going over. Pat, you want to raise your hand right there? Pat's kind of overseeing that. And there's a sign-up sheet out in the coffee area out there for us to sign up. We were informed, perhaps no surprise to me, and maybe not to you either, that the defunding of USAID is affecting this program. And so they are really in need of our financial help as they've never been before. And so while we hear stories about waste and all that sort of thing, and certainly everyone is in favor of, trying to make sure the money goes to the right place, this is one of the places that has been defunded, as have many, many other really good, notable ones, like $1 billion to helping feed our own children coming through the schools. So anyway, that's where we're at, and I think we're going to leave maybe around 11 o'clock. You can, there can be some carpooling that can take place. So with that said, I invite you to stand and get ready to sing as we send us out the door here. All right, so far you've given $176. March, they are Triple Madness March, so we are going to send that money away, but we're going to continue to receive your offerings all the way through the Lenten season. Okay, so that $175, when it's tripled, comes up to just short of $600. So anything you give today, we don't know about next week because, March, next Sunday is like the last Sunday in the month. So we want to make sure that we get that triple benefit, okay? So anything you give today, you can go, wow, my $5, I just gave $15. My $50, I just gave $150, okay? So that's what's out there. And so we're glad for those of us who are able to share. So we go forth, O Lord, in the name that is above every other name, the wonderful name of Jesus, who laid his life down for us and who taught us what it means to trust and to love and to forgive and to be a beacon of light and hope in times of darkness. So I pray that as we go forth, O Lord, we will find our strength and stand beside the oppressed. Go forth in peace and strength. Amen.